Let us not forget the humility of our origins, even at the apex of this great kingdom. Once there was nothing here but the shade of a forest, and the shadow of ignorance which veiled its inhabitants from the truth of our Lord. That was the ultimate foe that my ancestors faced. After all, there's nothing more deadly than a mind focused on only the wrong things. Kaiser Albrecht, the conqueror of Prussia, October 14th, 1267, the day of his coronation. A legend himself to have obtained that epithet, but his words ring true. Kaiser Albrecht's lineage began with a simple theologian wandering the many cities of the Holy Roman Empire, offering up good Christian services to anyone able to patronize him. He was a talented little scholar, having become a well-known knower of things by his late 20s, and riding that prestige into a life of luxury, and some might even say cult-like status, as he entered his 30s and 40s. This scholar was named Donar von Hoya. He has no noble origin, but was lucky enough to be admitted into a local school in Brunswick, where he could be molded into the great scholar he is now. Donar is a friendly and kind man whose ambitious nature pushes him to do as many great works in the name of the Lord as he can. That started off with transcriptions and works of literature. It included the likes of mediations for local squabbling lords, and the occasional tussle with some bandits who wouldn't listen to reason. Donar has lived a fulfilling life, and a useful one. He's a renowned name across not just the Holy Roman Empire, but even the likes of France or Iberia. It was after another successful round of almsgiving in the summer of 1087 that Donar took a path that would forever change his life and the very future of Europe along with it. He began a long pilgrimage to Jerusalem, passing through the many beautiful churches, cathedrals, and contrastingly desolate war zones along the way. Yet, those war zones did not evoke disgust from Donar. Instead, he saw in them the truth of the shifting realities that had been hidden from him with his charitable work back in Germany. The world is a violent place, because not all have embraced the Lord's dominion over earth. The sinners that reject God, they push good Christians to the sin of war and violence. He felt what can only be described as a righteous indignation at the injustice of the world. That just can't stand for this theologian. He made his way to Jerusalem and prayed, searching for guidance. His stay in Jerusalem was enlightening, and it triggered in this humble scholar the will to proselytize by any means necessary. Though he's certainly enjoyed his humble life up to now, he's found his true calling, and upon returning to Germany, he received blessings from the Archbishop of Cologne, yet his reputation preceded him. News that Donar, the great scholar of Germany, had returned from a trip to the Holy Land ready to bring the cross and the sword to the enemies of Christendom had sent a wave across the Catholic world. Though Donar spoke only of missionary work at first, he didn't hide that he'd be willing to take it further if need be. The Pope heard of his ambitions, and he liked the idea. When asked where he'd go, Donar answered that the very gates of Christendom stand under threat here in the Holy Roman Empire. The pagan Slavs of Pomerania would be his first choice. Thus, the Pope of the time, Anastasius IV, declared that Donar's cause would become that of all good Christian souls. He declared a crusade for Pomerania in July of 1096. This is where the story of a valuable scholar turns to that of a noble king, and the line of kings that would eventually be among the most feared warriors and respected scholars in all of Europe. The war for Pomerania was a joke of a conflict. The weight of nearly the entire Christian world bearing down on a few tribal Slavs had little chance of possibly going any other way beyond a total Christian victory. The Crusaders split the realm among themselves, but the Pope placed the crown of the newly born kingdom of Pomerania atop Donar's head. Along with the crown, the Pope gave Donar a name. He called him the Gracious, as he'd been a good Christian man as a commoner, and the world was sure he'd continue that as a king. The subordinate nobles of the new king were a bit less Christian in their backgrounds and motivations. Among them were Hungarian and French nobility mostly, alongside the occasional German. Though it might otherwise seem greedy, Donar's first act as king was to demand the noble houses of the kingdom give up their fiefdoms for the good of Christendom. Naturally, the noble lords would refuse and even accuse Donar of greed. He was above reproach nonetheless, and fought the nobles that wouldn't acquiesce. To lead up this war, he appointed a loyal Saxon knight to be his vanguard. While Donar's tyranny would have been controversial, he ended up getting every single lord of the realm to be either banished or stuck in his dungeon. The tyranny he inflicted would allow him to redistribute the land to loyal lords of Saxon origin, as well as his own family. Despite being a scholar, Donar found lots of time for raising a family, and he had a set of 6 children by his beloved wife Caracossa. Don't be fooled, she may be a Saxon, but she has an Italian name, and that's because Donar met her when she was quite young, and brought her into the Saxon cultural world over the years. Donar's first son is Theodoric, who is not nearly as Christian, shall we say, as his father, but extremely talented and strong-willed. His second son, Liudolf, is similarly hard-working but talented in different ways. The two are kind of rivals, being the competing sons of their legendary father's inheritance. After Liudolf, Donar had twins, Philip and Philippa, a son and a daughter. Donar had a sense of humor about him which he expressed with little things like this. Lastly, Donar's final child was Dietke, who had only recently been born. The realm mostly looks to the first two sons as their potential future lords. Theodoric is the heir, as the eldest, however Donar made it clear that the son who deserves it the most will ultimately be king. He appointed Liudolf to the Duchy of Pomerania and Philip to Wallachia. His eldest Theodoric was given no land and instead would serve in the various positions of the court to prove his value to the kingdom with his personal talents. Despite his advanced age, Donar had maintained a healthy enough lifestyle that he doesn't seem close to his time. Thus, he continued to rule with strength. He ordered his vassals to encourage migration from Germany into Pomerania. The best way to convert the pagans, surely, is to let them mingle among the superior Christian Germans. They will eventually choose the better faith. In light of these tumultuous times, Donar went on to host a coronation. It's time to take a shift from a rowdy Crusader kingdom into an established kingdom of the Holy Roman Empire, akin to Bohemia. At least that's Donar's intention. He sees himself and his kingdom as members of the imperial community, even if officially Pomerania is its own kingdom for the time being. He promised to keep the kingdom at peace, at least for a time, and to let the realm prosper while the Germans and Slavs commingle. After the coronation, which was open to the public and the aristocracy all, King Donar hosted a private feast just for the nobles to be held at Stettin. More than for his own connection to his nobles, this was an opportunity for his various sons to interact with each other and the other lords. A practice run, if you will, an opportunity for each son to prove himself. Liudolf of Pomerania proved somewhat unsocial, but he had a real air to him, while Theodoric attended to his duties quite well. It was Philip, the youngest, who spent far more of his time in prayer than attending the festivities, which he felt were beneath him. In his advanced age, Donar enjoyed seeing how his sons interacted, but he saw in Theodoric, his eldest and presumed heir, a proper king. The old man intends to name him the heir after a little more time preparing the realm. Now that he's invited the realm to his court, he's off to visit their courts to inspect the rulership of his sons. If they rule justly in their domains, that justice may spread to the rest of the kingdom upon assuming the crown. Before planning that trip, Donar looked for some brides for his sons. For Theodoric, he arranged a betrothal to the recently born Estrid Princess of Denmark, Bodil. A Danish princess could prove a valuable family connection one day. He didn't find any satisfactory brides for his other sons, but he promised them he'd keep an ear to the ground in case the rumblings of any great princesses reached him. Ready for his grand tour, Donar's decrepit body kept on moving, but it was clear age was finally catching up to him. He started walking with a cane in the spring of 1107, the first outward sign of age he'd really shown yet. By the winter of the same year, he'd completed his rounds and found that overall his sons and lesser lords were ruling well. He sat on his throne, let out a sigh, and prepared for death to take him. Really, it wasn't far off. Donar took great pleasure in the details of rulership. He often listened to his subjects and their pleas with great intent. He wanted to know whether or not his project to civilize the pagan Slavs was working, and from all accounts, it seemed to be working quite well. The city of Stettin became a majority Saxon-speaking as early as February of 1108, though he had greater ambitions than just one city. The culture of the Germans that had been arriving in Stettin, though closely tied to the Western Saxons of Germany proper, had a different view on their roles here in Pomerania. The sorts of people that Donar's calls for settlement attracted were a combination of religious scholars and warriors, or frontiersmen and daring adventurers, but all had an understanding of the role that their faith had in the justification of their settlement. And so, the Pomeranian Germans, or the Pommern, emerged as a new identity along the Baltic coast, starting in Stettin and eventually spreading out from the city. Donar would be first among the Pommern as their great founder, but he's hoping his sons can be great cultural leaders for the people too one day. Though the Germanization of Pomerania will take some time, the many missionaries of the realm have spread the Catholic faith far and wide across the kingdom. While certainly still a mixed nation by 1111, much of the large urban centers have become a mix of Slavic and Germanic Christians. The realm is prospering, and with that, Donar announced Theodoric as his heir, feeling the boy was ready. This was upsetting to Liudolf, who also felt he deserved the throne. However, he was a reasonable child. He knew he was lucky to control the easternmost territory of the kingdom in Pomerania, and he asked his father if he might have the right to one day strike out and make his own kingdom east of the Vistula River. "You're your own man, my son," Donar told him, effectively giving him permission. And with that, a succession dispute has, in theory, been resolved. What may actually happen is another issue, though, and one which Donar won't live to see. Among his final major contributions to the realm was the acquisition of the Duchy of Prussia as a vassal. He had worked closely with the local Baltic lord of Trousseau to introduce Christianity and engender friendly relations by getting his son Philip married to Gurkis, a princess of the Prussians. Though not an especially prestigious marriage, Prince Philip didn't have any particular political aspirations that would seem oppose a marriage which his father felt was expedient. It turns out the Missionary King could be quite diplomatic when he wanted to be. After all, he did value faith and willing converts significantly. That said, war wasn't always off the table. The stubborn kings of Poland would not give up the rightful Prussian territory they had occupied for many years, and as the Prussians have now Christianized and become subjects of a righteous Christian kingdom, Donar declared their occupation illegal and went to war for it. The veterans of the crusade that Donar had at his command were vastly superior to their Polish foes, and many lives were lost at Chełmno, but the land dispute was resolved, hopefully permanently, in October of 1114. Of particular distinction in that war was Prince Theodoric himself, whose combination of bravery at the head of the heavy infantry and wisdom as a tactician saw him earn significant support among the soldiers of the kingdom. That didn't go unnoticed by his ambitious brother, who could tell the realm was quickly leaving him behind. No matter, once Prince Liudolf has the opportunity to make his own kingdom in the east, the world will know who among the two brothers is superior. The Pomeranian people's influence has spread far from Stettin as of November of 1117, with even Liudolf's capital in Danzig embracing the German identity. The Germanization of this land, while forceful, has mostly been non-violent. Local Pomeranian and Polabian Slavs are certainly discriminated against and encouraged to learn German and embrace German ways of life, but there haven't, so far, been any mass graves at least. This is just the way Donar wants it. Is it slower than genocide? Yes, but it means a guilt-free kingdom, which can stand proud of its history. As Liudolf had hoped, his father granted him permission to conduct a war in the east, where negotiations for the Christianization of the Lithuanians fell apart. The lords there were not as friendly as the Prussians, nor were they interested in diplomacy. Unfortunately for Liudolf, his father insisted that Theodoric continue to actually lead the vanguard and be allowed to show his bravery. Though Liudolf would get the spoils of war, he wouldn't necessarily get the glory. The conniving younger brother had an idea though. If he could get his brother trapped in some kind of Lithuanian ambush, he might get killed, and as such there'd be only one choice for heir. The youngest, Philip, had long bowed out of the competition, choosing a life of simple prayer, so of course only Liudolf would be fit as a king, should Theodoric be eliminated. Liudolf had the army fight against a Lithuanian force at Tilsit, hoping a stray arrow might catch his brother. However, the Lithuanians didn't stand a chance against the extremely talented heavy footmen of Pomerania, and in fact the loyal crusaders who had come to love Theodoric informed him of his brother's seemingly impure intentions. The two brothers were already rivals by circumstance, but things became personal quite quickly after this revelation. Regardless, that conquest would be the last major event before Donar's death. He felt his body ache in a new sort of way in 1120, and it told him that soon he'd ascend to heaven. Before passing though, Donar remembered he'd promised his son a bride, and so he arranged for Liudolf's betrothal to the young Adela of the Holy Roman Empire, a princess of the illustrious house Etishonen-Rovigo, a cadet branch of the very same dynasty of Etisho from which the Habsburgs originate historically. Donar seems to have developed a pattern of getting his sons betrothed to princesses less than a quarter their age, which was a little bit strange, but considering his own age gap with his wife, maybe he didn't find it strange to marry someone 30 or more years younger. It was one of those little pieces of quirky character that those close to Donar would remember, but the history books would probably forget. Regardless, the Missionary King swore fealty to the Kaiser Notker in return for that princess, formally entering Pomerania into the Holy Roman Empire as its probably most powerful kingdom, at least for now. Pomerania became a march of the empire, contributing massive military forces for the Kaiser's own usage, but paying no taxes. This was decreed by the Kaiser, who probably was delighted to have such talented veterans and men of military acumen under his command. A few short months later, Donar did pass away from some combination of opportunistic illnesses that targeted his long frail body. Theodoric was to be crowned King of Pomerania, while his brother Liudolf struck out on his own in Lithuania and Prussia, though he refused to give up Pomerelia, which was rightfully Theodoric's land. So quickly will there be a territorial dispute, it seems. Quick thing, by the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, consider subscribing. I'm told that by just asking once in a while, way more of you will do it. Thanks. Beyond land, gold, soldiers, titles, or even genes, there's a far greater inheritance that every heir receives from their predecessor upon assuming a throne, and that's an expectation. Most of the time, the lords of the realm look upon the new king as a continuation of the old one, unless they have some reason to think otherwise. Both Theodoric of Pomerania and Liudolf of Prussia have an expectation to continue the pious rulership of their father, and yet, neither has the cause of the church truly in their heart. With the death of the Missionary King, there stand now two kings, whose rule will most likely reflect the more standard lives of your average king of the era. Liudolf in particular would show his intentions as king, as his first move in the realm was to get to work removing the lords that had always been loyal to his father, so he could claim their land for himself. He called on his brother in Stettin to help him, reminding him that he is honor-bound to aid him. Clucas, the lord of Trousseau, and father of his brother Philip's wife Gurkis, was imprisoned and removed from power in Prussia, alongside even many of the Germans that were granted power in Lithuania. Liudolf was planning to consolidate his power around the rich ports of Prussia and Pomerania, though he might eventually grow strong enough to overthrow his much-beloved brother in Pomerania. His plan might just have worked, had he not immediately antagonized his entire realm with tyranny right from the beginning. Perhaps he forgot that though his brother was honor-bound to aid him, honor was not so binding as the limitless need for power that consumed all kings. In May of 1125, Theodoric poisoned the wine that Liudolf had come to enjoy drinking so much, and upon capturing the servant that did it, the boy was beaten until he revealed the truth to Liudolf's spymaster. As the first German king of Prussia died, he commanded his spymaster to ensure that every soul in Christendom knew of his brother's kinslaying. Then he collapsed, never to stand again. Before the man's body could even turn cold, Theodoric entered Pomerania, claiming his rightful inheritance. It turns out, getting married so late in life left Liudolf with no children. Though everyone knew that Theodoric's inheritance was stained in blood, no one could reasonably contest it. Pomerania and Prussia are once again united, though it will forever stain the king's reputation. Perhaps the late King Donar had come to misunderstand his own son. Maybe Theodoric was an otherwise relatively godly man, but one consumed by hatred in this one instance. Regardless, his ambition knew no bounds, and in this era of Pomeranian history will there be much glory to be gained. Having abandoned all pretense of Crusader Kingdom, Theodoric got himself involved in the normal politics of a dynastic kingdom, and that began with exploiting family connections to obtain more power. His wife, from Denmark, has given him, so far, just one daughter, and he is already 42. That said, thanks to his wife's youth, more children could very well be on the way. Even so, son or not, Bodil has a rightful claim to Denmark, which can be pushed. If Theodoric can rule Pomerania, Prussia, and Denmark, he'd have immense control over the Baltic Sea, which, maybe when those fancy new trade mechanics come out for CK3, might mean something. For now, it's just a cool shape for a kingdom, I guess. The problem with Theodoric's plan is that his wife is a woman, and women's claims can't be pushed against a legitimate king. He'll have to either wait a generation and hope for a son with his wife, or hope that King Niels Halfdanson ends up in some kind of regency or succession war. Rather than rest on his laurels, the king went for some of his de jure land in Prussia, completing his entire de jure realm in October 1126. In theory, this is the maximum legitimate and legal extent of his kingdoms, but there's always a reason to claim beyond the natural borders of a king's kingdom. Theodoric got an earful from his brother Philip, who has seen him now murder his own brother, engage in a great many acts of war, and plot to undermine his in-laws. Unfortunately for the pious brother, there's little he can do, as he swore an oath to serve his king, and he'd never go back on a proper oath. Philip would always serve as an attempt at a moral compass for Theodoric, though he'd rarely, if ever, succeed in changing his course. That said, the Pomeranian king did take some time to let his kingdom breathe. He went on a pilgrimage, he toured the realm, he spent some years with his family, and told his soldiers to stay sharp, but to enjoy time with their wives and children. More war will come, but everyone needs a break. One of the king's favorite breaks was hunting. What a great joy it is to get outdoors, breathe fresh air, and show off one's muscles to their beloved wife. There was just one problem. That gnat, Philip. He couldn't help but bother Theodoric about how his realm could better serve God, and he always looked at him with a judgmental sense, likely over the known killing of Liudolf. Rather than continue to suffer his brother's incessant complaining, Theodoric went all in on the kinslayer narrative. While no one was watching, he shot an arrow into Philip, hitting him right in the heart, and then swiftly fled to continue the hunt. Some time later, the hunters noticed Philip was missing, and upon finding his cold corpse, a cursory investigation would find that an arrow loosed carelessly by a squire went somewhere it shouldn't have. The squire was forgiven, but had some of his fingers cut off so that he might never use a bow again. Philip's sons would divide up his meager duchy, and presumably they would always suspect foul play, but have no power to do anything about it. Those unpleasantries aside, it was a few years after Philip's death that Theodoric decided war was back on the table. Theodoric had his eyes set on the fertile fields of Poland, specifically the fields of Greater Poland around the city of Poznań. The fields there could make a breadbasket for the kingdom. The question is, how can he lay claim to this foreign duchy? In this matter, he has his father Donar to thank. Theodoric has many nephews and nieces at his disposal, all of whom Donar was diligent to get married to various lords of middling status. Even Theodoric's sisters have been married matrilineally to the second and third sons of various duchies and kingdoms, and it just so happens that the Duke of Greater Poland, one Jan the Honest, granted his second-born son Jan's hand in marriage to Philippa, the twin sister of Philip. The two had 3 children, and the young and loyal Patrick von Hoya has been chosen as the claimant to Greater Poland. There was something to be said for Theodoric's guilty conscience over murdering his last brother Philip. His twin Philippa really missed him, and conquering a bit of land for his twin sister's son could maybe be a redeeming action. Maybe. War broke out in February of 1134, as Theodoric asserted his nephew Patrick's claim to Poznań and its outskirts. After an initial siege along the border, the two kings met on the battlefield at Quercus, where Theodoric's forces were more numerous, better equipped, and better trained. The Polish army was killed or captured to a man, with not even one survivor making it out to alert the king that his army had been defeated. A few more sieges later, and the Poles surrendered their lands to the Pomeranian invaders. Patrick swore an oath of vassalage and began as ruler of Poznań thereafter. After seeing his valiant effort to conquer land for the family, Theodoric was approached by his beloved wife Bodil. She asked him if perhaps one day she could rule her old home of Denmark. Bodil was more a German queen than a Danish princess by now, but she knew that it would please her husband and bring them both great power if she could be her own queen and his queen. She could guarantee that her children would even have greater wealth and greater power in this world, but her claim to Denmark was weak. She's a granddaughter of a long-dead king, and it's unlikely that her own children would have any rightful claims to the throne. She thought it might be difficult to convince Theodoric to push her claim, but instead he told her that he was already planning on putting her in power there. His thoughtfulness of her deepened their love more than 1,000 roses could, and a few years later, Theodoric once again wetted his hands in the blood of family. King Niels the Stout of Denmark is Theodoric's cousin-in-law via his marriage to Bodil, and he invited the king to feast in Pomerania in celebration of his victory in Poland and his love for his wife. At that feast, Niels' drink would be poisoned, and the king died soon after. Theodoric found some servant to blame, killed him, and then wrote a letter to the new king of Denmark, one Valentin Nielsen. He wrote to this 9-year-old boy that he's too young to take the throne, and that he ought to let his cousin Bodil rule in his stead. Theodoric received no response, but he also only waited a handful of days, giving the Danish court basically no time to respond, before he sent another letter declaring that a child is not fit for the throne. He pressed his wife's claim and prepared to sail to Roskilde. And yet, the Danes proved a surprising adversary as they actually sailed into Rügen, thinking their once proud Viking warriors could possibly stand against the battle-hardened vanguards of Pomerania. At the Battle of Stralsund, the Danes were completely cut to pieces, their bodies thrown into the sea, lest they occupy too many graves in the kingdom. Roskilde was then sieged, and Valentin was dragged out to confront his cousin. Bodil promised him she'd rule with honor and integrity, and that she'd treat him well as a subject. The boy had no advisors to help him now, and so he gave in to what his cousin demanded. The kingdom of Denmark would be ruled by Pomerania now, in the form of a marriage union, and Theodoric would do everything in his power to keep his beautiful wife happy and healthy on her throne. It's an interesting thing to consider what sort of king Theodoric will be remembered as. Not to say his reign is over, but more to say that he's established a precedent for himself. He's a man willing to do anything to gain power for himself and his family. He'd even kill his own family if it would help empower the dynasty. Whether or not Theodoric's memory will be tainted by those murders, the ones everyone knows he did, and the ones everyone thinks he did, will depend on how the kingdom prospers as he enters his middle age. How much can one king do before he's satisfied with what he's done? If Theodoric had any more brothers, would he kill them too? If he could have a second wife, would he claim a throne for her too? If he had a cousin with the right claim, would he claim more land in his name? Well, as Theodoric enters his 50s, it seems he's become satisfied with life. He's spending his time with his sons, specifically Hermann and Albrecht, who are his heirs. Despite having had 10 kids, only 4 of them were sons, one of whom died before his first year of life. His third son, Theodoric Jr., is more of a spare than an heir, though he is still in line to at least inherit a small patch of land and become a duke under one of his brothers. Theodoric remembers when he inherited Pomerania and what he did to return Prussia to his control. His brother, Liudolf, just wasn't a worthy king, at least in his mind, but he's starting to realize that when his kingdom is divided up, his sons will probably go through the same thought and maybe even pursue the same solutions to their problems. Well, that'll be their prerogative to pursue it. It was certainly a callous perspective, but one that Theodoric felt attached to. He grew up having to fight for what he had, and in so doing, he truly earned it. If his sons should squabble over their kingdoms and be unwilling to share, then may the strongest one defeat the others and continue a strong lineage. Naturally, he didn't communicate this feeling to his nobles, and especially not his wife, the mother of those children. Instead, he would often make his sons promise to always love each other, and he would assign Pomerania to Albrecht and Prussia to Hermann. He told Theodoric that he personally could choose a plot of land under one of his brothers and serve as a loyal vassal whenever he's ready. The brothers loved each other in their youth, their minds untainted by the greed of a kingdom, so all seemed well. This would give King Theodoric the leeway to continue his ambitions for the family. His father Donar had the right idea. Daughters are truly the key to power through their ability to entangle themselves into other families. Now, Donar got his daughters married based on what he had hoped would be actually happy marriages. He hoped his daughters would live happy lives, and many of them did. Some of them married small-time nobles, and some of them married the sons of dukes. But he insisted that they all maintain their last names. He couldn't let any of his daughters go, truly, for he loved them. Theodoric is an even more prestigious king than his father, in a way, and as such he could set up marriages for his daughters with even greater nobles. He had his daughter Ida betrothed to the young Prince Frank of England, an albino son of the king. The English king agreed because of the alliance, but knew that this might cause problems one day. Nonetheless, Theodoric would honor his alliance with the English should they ask. It's all just practice for his legendary army at this point. He wasn't interested in just one throne, though. Theodoric got his daughter Wulfhild married to Prince Guillaume of France. In this case, the French king accepted because the Tours dynasty is a new claimant to the throne, and they'll need both military support and the legitimacy of a better established bloodline like the von Hoya family. That's 2 kingdoms which one day may fall under the von Hoya umbrella, and all it'll cost is little military action. England called on Theodoric to help against the Scots, and of course the Pomeranian army was ready to help. There's not much to say about these tiny campaigns. Of course, the Prussian army would dominate under the wise guidance of a great figure like Theodoric. While Albrecht was off in Scotland fighting and learning the ways of war, Theodoric got him a wife from Poland. Although you'd think the Poles would have little to no trust for the king that previously invaded them, it was actually a survival tactic to marry into the von Hoya family. Albrecht's marriage to the Piast princess Adleta will create an alliance, and the gamble here is that once the two have kids, Poland might be strong enough to hold off the Pomeranians. An unlikely outcome in Theodoric's mind, so he took the gamble. Unfortunately for the ambitious king, it takes time for kids to grow up and for kings to die and pass their claims down, so the next decade or two of time would see Theodoric mostly just supporting his allies and enjoying some downtime. He's feasting and hunting, and he thought about hurrying along the deaths of his in-laws, but he just doesn't have the gusto to do it anymore. He's claimed many souls on the battlefield, but casualties of war come with honor. The rumors of his rampant murders are a stain he's hoping not to leave his sons with. By the spring of 1159, Theodoric is slowing down. He's an old man, and one whose mortality is becoming more and more real with each day. The first part of his body to go was his sight. Theodoric had been getting worse and worse vision for some time, but in January of 1161, he'd finally gone fully blind. In some stories about him, they say that his refusal to see the crimes in all his murders was the real blindness he suffered from, but those stories would be suppressed by the kingdom's chronicle writers, of course. While aiding his French allies with a war in Iberia, the Pope declared a crusade for Galicia, looking to reclaim the holy site of Santiago. Naturally, as Theodoric himself is the son of a great crusader, he would sponsor this war and inform his sons that they'll be fighting for Christendom once more. Theodoric wrapped up that war on France's behalf, took the men home to restyle their armor with crosses, and the crusade began in March of 1166. Theodoric chose to stay home though, and no one blamed him. He's blind, he walks with a cane, and he has already proven himself as a warrior king in this world. Instead, his sons would go to Iberia to represent Pomerania and the von Hoya Crusader household. Theodoric put up his unmarried daughter Irmgard as the benefactor of the crusade, asking the Pope to grant the kingdom to her should his armies prove victorious, and the Pope would of course agree. Quite frankly, this crusade was a joke. The number of Muslim lords willing to fight for control over just a small territory in Galicia was minimal, and as the famed Pomeranian army arrived, the heathens were cut down. It's almost boring how easily these armies fall to even his sons, let alone King Theodoric and his great martial mind itself. What's nice about all this is that each of his sons would now get to call themselves Crusaders, even if it's a sort of misnomer with how simple the conflict was. It's also another throne for the family, and one which hopefully will live on. The ambitious young men of Theodoric's army didn't return right away. They instead went to Wales to help the English in yet more wars, after which they did finally come home, satisfied they'd gotten their fill of glory. Around the spring of 1172, the rest of Theodoric's body was failing him, and he knew he had just 1 year left in him. He sent his army on one last campaign to aid his French allies before meeting with his sons. He told them to remember that the family comes first. The von Hoya house is one known for carrying the sword and the cross, and that reputation must supersede any unfavorable rumors out there. The boys knew what he was talking about, but wouldn't dare name it. Accusations of kinslaying would surely cause trouble, and yet the old man felt no need for secrets anymore. I did murder my brothers, boys. I'm not proud of it, but I don't regret it. What I did because it was what was best for the family. You boys, you're all good men. You fought hard, and you'll have your share of what I've gained. He paused, as if to think over what his next words would be. Be neither too swift to decide what is best for the family, nor too afraid to do what must be done. I'm trusting all three of you to carry in mind my father's legacy. The boys looked at each other nervously. It was as if their father had given them permission to murder each other. They had nothing to say, if only out of shock, but the king continued before they could be shaken from their amazement. Boys, do not misunderstand me. Your lives are only as valuable as they are able to pursue unity in the family. You are strong as individuals. You are strong as multiples when combined, but only are you weak as multiples when against one another. He looked as if he was thinking to continue his speech, but having been dealing with some oncoming dementia for a few years now, Theodoric soon entered a fog and told his sons to leave. He needed rest. Rest he would take here would be his last one. King Theodoric passed away in April of 1173. Before he quite died, the sons Albrecht, Hermann, and Theodoric exited the king's chambers and had a group hug. They had one thing that united them all, and that was that they were all zealous believers in God, who served in wars together. They made a promise to always support one another and to not repeat the mistakes of their father. They held locked, solemn eyes, and their bond grew beyond what any war could give them. Maybe it was Theodoric's way of atoning for his sins to bring his sons together like this. Maybe he was actually hoping they would follow in his footsteps. Maybe he was just rambling about nothing but happened to have an impact. Regardless, the three sons attended their father's funeral and split up his land according to the will that had long been written for them. To Albrecht went Pomerania, to Hermann went Prussia, and Theodoric chose to rule a duchy in central Pomerania under Albrecht. Their mother, the Queen of Denmark, Bodil, was happy to see her sons again after a long time away from them, and she grieved deeply for her beloved husband. From here, we will follow the perspective of the middle brother, Hermann, and that's because he's the king of Prussia. You know, I almost forgot this video was about Prussia, really. Well, this is the right setup for it to happen. Had Theodoric not murdered Liudolf all those years ago, there may have been an independent Prussia which could have developed its own culture and society by now. Now that the kingdoms of Pomerania and Prussia have been separated and done so amicably, it should also be possible for there to be a final Prussian kingdom with its own way of life. Prussia was not the center of the von Hoya dynasty at this point. Pomerania was definitely the dominant kingdom of the dynasty's holdings, and as such, Prussia is not in a very strong position. It's only because of his friendship with his brothers that King Hermann really even has a chance in this world. It would be easy pickings for the Balts or the Slavs to conquer Prussia without that friendship, and Hermann made a point of using his brothers to help secure his kingdom. Nonetheless, he did first distinguish himself from his brothers by creating a cadet branch of the von Hoya dynasty. He now belongs to the House Königsberg, which will become the branch most strongly associated with Prussia in good time. Something very interesting happened, though, in May of 1178, and that was the death of the Holy Roman Emperor. By this point, you may have forgotten that Pomerania and Prussia are kingdoms within the Holy Roman Empire, and as such they enjoy the rights and responsibilities owed to the empire. The thing is, Prussia and Pomerania have gotten so large that they now control enough of the Baltic Empire for pretenders to potentially found a new empire. That's exactly what happened, as a little boy was crowned the Kaiser of the Baltic Empire, taking Hermann and his brother as vassal kings with him. Now, the consequence of this will ultimately be the exit of the von Hoya and Königsberg houses from the Holy Roman Empire. Quite frankly, the Baltic Empire, such as it is, has absolutely no legitimacy whatsoever in the eyes of its vassals, and so Hermann immediately got to work dismantling it. Within just a few years, Hermann captured the boy Kaiser, forced him to dissolve the Baltic Empire, and then returned home. Being a very spiritual people, the Pomeranian Germans felt that they were intrinsically tied to the Holy Roman Empire, but if political circumstances have changed that, then it is what it is. Prussia itself no longer even borders the Holy Roman Empire due to Pomerania's exit from the empire and failure to rejoin. This will begin the creation of an even stronger Prussian identity, both as a culture and a realm. That all aside, Hermann hosted a coronation in September of 1181, where he'd take on his proper crown. He made an oath to ensure peace, which was a curious choice when part of his land was illegally held by Poland. It was more an oath to his brothers, who had all promised to care for each other. The sons were waiting to see which of them would end up inheriting the kingdom of Denmark from their mother, Bodil. She was leaning towards giving the kingdom to Theodoric Jr., the only son to not have a kingdom of his own, and that felt just to all three. What's funny though, is that when Bodil did die in 1183, her kingdom did pass to Theodoric, but her personal domain was split up among the other brothers, due to the convoluted nature of Danish succession laws. As Germans, who were foreign to that land, I couldn't really contest it. So the Kingdom of Denmark basically ceased to exist from this moment. The peninsula of Jylland went to the Kingdom of Prussia, while the islands of, and I've been practicing my Danish pronunciation for this by the way, the islands of Fyn, Sjælland, and Lolland went to Pomerania. Theodoric inherited what remained of Denmark as a sort of rump state at best. Nonetheless, this did not shake the brothers' friendship, as they felt it was the fault of the Danes that this would happen. None of them actually did want this. That said, a tragedy hit the brothers shortly after. Albrecht was killed in battle, presumably against either a random vassal or perhaps the supposed Baltic Empire's forces, as a petty act of revenge. He was succeeded by his own Theodoric II of Pomerania. Yes, I know a lot of characters named Theodoric now, but I'll start appending their titles to their names to keep it simple to follow. Thus, where we now stand is with Theodoric of Denmark, Theodoric II of Pomerania, and of course, Hermann of Prussia. To remember his brother, Hermann named his firstborn son Albrecht and would raise him to be a great man who could hopefully act as a reflection of the man that his brother could have been. The thing about King Hermann is that his relationship with his brothers has created a relatively frictionless world for him. That's not the worst thing, but in terms of occurrences, it makes for an uneventful rule. Instead, Hermann is sort of a transitional king between an era of kingdom building and conquest into an era of cultural growth and identity. In the past couple decades, Pomeranian culture has flourished in Prussia, but subtle differences between Pomeranians in Prussia and those from actual Pomerania became more and more obvious over time. In June of 1191, the people started to call themselves Prussians instead of Pomeranians, and a new cultural identity centered on Königsberg came to be. The Germans who had traveled even further east to Curonia still identify themselves with Pomerania, but perhaps they will one day have their own identity too. Time will tell. Regardless, this new Prussian culture is a bit more militaristic than their Western counterparts, mostly on account of the continuing need to fight against the Poles and other Balto-Slavs of the region. Despite having only ruled for a relatively short period, Hermann came to his throne relatively old. His son, Albrecht, reached the age of maturity in February of 1195. He was betrothed to a Polish princess. King Hermann was barely even there by the time he made that marriage, mustering all his mental strength to fight through his advanced dementia to get his son a good marriage before promptly passing away in March of 1199. He almost saw the 13th century, the poor man. And so Prussia has a new king. This is King Albrecht, an administrative master and kind king, whose continued peaceful intentions may have to come to terms with the nature of his people. Albrecht is a figure most strongly associated with concepts like governance, justice, and righteousness. He's not a legendary king by any means, nor is he one particularly poised to do something great. In fact, it's well expected that he'll simply rule uneventfully. That's how he'd want it too, in a way. That said, he's not a weak king, nor will he allow anyone to think he is. Albrecht first got to work reclaiming his domain from his brother. Though his father and uncles may have been good friends, the new Prussian king sees himself as the sole master of Prussia. Some Lithuanian lords had a problem with this tyranny, and so they also rose up in rebellion, but this just means they too will be branded traitors, and Albrecht will replace them with proper Prussians. From here, the more boring aspect of Albrecht came to the forefront. He has new land, and it must be put back in order to generate revenue and fund the eventual creation of an army. Despite his marriage to a Polish princess, the Poles continue to illegally occupy Prussian territory just south of Königsberg, and that cannot stand. And yet, the king is itching to see justice done. He's not the best at waiting. In the summer of 1211, he heard news from the far east of some great warlord named Temujin. They're calling him Genghis Khan, the ruler of the world or something. What a preposterous idea. At the same time, wouldn't it be nice to just crush all your enemies without a worry in the world about the likes of income and administration? No, thought Albrecht. What's the point of being a ruler if the people don't benefit from it? So he continued his wise governance until war came to him. His second cousin, Magnhard of Pomerania, the grandson of his uncle Albrecht, declared war looking to conquer Danzig. It's not as if Danzig is the core of Prussian power, but of course, to lose this war would be weakness. Whether the realm is ready or not, war has come. Indeed, King Albrecht's army has already been off helping his Polish allies fight some Russians or something, which might confuse you given the aforementioned desire to reclaim Poland's occupied territories. Albrecht's marriage to a Polish princess is a long-term game, with the hopes of creating an eventual union between the kingdoms perhaps. That would certainly be one way to reclaim the occupied territories, no? Regardless, the Prussian armies returned to Prussia to defend against the Pomeranians. The House von Hoya and the House Königsberg would forever find themselves separated from this point, despite the intentions of their heads just a generation ago. The unfortunate thing about how inheritances work is that Magnhard, as the head of the main family branch von Hoya, inherited most of the great veterans from Theodoric I's legendary military campaigns, and those veterans trained up an army of young warriors whose ferocity was beyond the Prussians. Rather than throw his people's lives away, Albrecht chose to give up Danzig, even if it made him look weak. There's no reason to throw lives away for mere pride, and for this, Albrecht would gain a lot of love from his people. Now, don't let it be said that Albrecht's kindness makes him immune to the grip of ambition. He's not happy about his cousin's war against him. In fact, he's even more upset because that brat of a supposed ruler decided to host some massive wedding after the war, as if robbing family of land is something worth celebrating. Well, there's a pattern emerging with the larger von Hoya dynasty, and that's kinslaying. Albrecht attended the wedding of his second cousin, fully intending to push him down some stairs. However, as luck would have it, the cycle of murder was broken when, conveniently, Magnhard died from his general poor health anyway. The idea behind this murder would be to throw Pomerania into chaos and put into power the young and weak Adalbert, who did indeed take the throne. Albrecht feigned his condolences before returning home to prepare for war. War did indeed break out in September of 1219, and Albrecht even had Poland on his side to help. You know, upon further reflection, I realized that Poland has been such a wild card of a realm in this story. Nonetheless, they are still around, and if we're being honest, the Poles are more powerful than the Prussians or Pomeranians right now. In fact, they're so powerful that I've mislabeled them. That's not Poland, that's the Empire of West Slavia. What a great day for both the Poles and for Albrecht. After all, his Piast wife has a claim to that throne. Some early occupations saw Prussia gaining the upper hand early on in the war, and then in November of 1220, the Battle of Zieten saw the Pomeranians suffer a crushing defeat. But the war did not end there. The West Slavs had to head east to deal with some Russian invaders and left the Prussians to fend for themselves. This was grave news, as the Pomeranians largely held the advantage over them. King Albrecht suffered several defeats in Pomerania and had to pull his men back. The war entered a sort of stalemate here, where neither side was willing to push against the other for fear of being caught out as the attacker. On the defensive, either side could reasonably win. Nonetheless, the casualties of those recent battles proved difficult to replace, and as a result, Albrecht began recruiting even women into his army, where they could prove equal in talent to the men. In so doing, he set the precedent for a Prussian culture which valued men and women equally on the field. After a few more years of stagnation, the West Slavs did return to the field, albeit their numbers had shrunk due to their other wars and a recent succession. The previous emperor must have died in combat somewhere. Albrecht, his Polish allies, and all the men and women he could muster were finally able to win the war in August of 1225 after they occupied Stettin, killing the young king there and capturing his sister and heiress. It turned out this war had been so disastrous for Pomerania that a peasant by the name of Ecbert successfully broke free from the kingdom, taking Danzig and Berlin with him. He's a Nordmarker, which is a culture Albrecht was unfamiliar with. Apparently the people in and around Berlin had established their own identity in recent years, speaking a language more reminiscent of Polish or Sorbian than German. The Nordmarker realm would be allowed to exist, but only if it would swear fealty to the proper kingdom of Prussia-Pomerania. The peasants refused, so war began again with the intention to subjugate them. Having gained experience in the half-decade war against Pomerania, Albrecht's men were battle-hardened and easily defeated the Nordmarkers, formally fusing Prussia and Pomerania into an unbroken union. Oh, and also Westphalia collapsed shortly after this. It's always funny to call an emperor into a war, see him die in combat, then watch his realm explode after. Albrecht knows full well that that was more or less his fault entirely. Before Albrecht can continue his wars, perhaps to claim Denmark or Poland, he had to deal with some rebellious Pomeranian lords, many of whom were his distant relatives. Take Meinwerk of Greater Poland. He's the grandson of Patrick, the son of Philippa, whose twin Philip was murdered by Theodoric during a hunt all that time ago. Remember him? Well, his lineage wouldn't actually end here. Since the kind man that Albrecht is, he just ransomed these lords back rather than revoke their titles or execute them. Isn't it so wonderful that the descendants of Patrick of Poznań get to continue on? In November of 1228, Albrecht went after Denmark, simply because he could, really. His family had shared these crowns for some time, but the importance of family cooperation fell to the wayside after just a couple generations. Being no more than a rump state, really, Denmark fell very quickly, and Albrecht immediately removed the strange Scandinavian inheritance laws that plagued that kingdom. He aligned them with the more traditional Galvakind partition that Prussia-Pomerania was using, and then promptly stopped his warpath when he caught a cold and nearly died of the flu. By the summer of 1230, Albrecht had recovered from his illness, but he's hit the geriatric age of 51, and as such his bones and heart are barely functioning. He found himself withdrawing from the politics of the world a bit. He did send an army off to fight in Castile for another crusade, and he did take notice of the total collapse of the Holy Roman Empire, which fell to a strange Andaluso-Croatian conqueror that had recently taken up residence along the Adriatic. How that happened will be a puzzle for the world, but Albrecht did decide to invade the Andaluso-Croatian kingdom of Germany to claim a little bit of Holstein so that he could connect his kingdoms by land. Unfortunately for him, he caught a second cold and died on that campaign. He knew his time was nearly up anyway, and passed without bitterness. His son, Albrecht II, sat with him on his deathbed, and King Albrecht knew that his son would make for a great ruler. There are no more family kingdoms to worry about splitting, as he'd only had the one son, and Albrecht II is a king with significantly greater ambitions than his father. Albrecht I had one last thing to tell his son before he died. He showed him a private collection of poetry he'd been assembling over the years. It turns out that this king had been penning stories about his experiences as the ruler, and he kept all the poems he'd written to himself until his death. He told his son to do with them whatever he wanted, and Albrecht II chose to compile them into a curated collection, which should be published as the first real piece of Prussian literature. The poet-warrior king would become the pseudo-autobiographical writings of the legendary founder of the soon-to-exist Prussian Empire. That was the intention anyway, for young Albrecht II. After his coronation, Albrecht II made no promises of peace. Instead, he promised to bring enlightenment to Königsberg in the form of a university. With the fall of German civilization, to the Andaluso-Croatians, Prussia would have to become the new center of German life. Beyond that though, Albrecht II, known from here on as just Albrecht or King Albrecht to save my breath, is a smart enough king to know that those Mongols from the Far East, they're going to be a problem one day. They haven't reached very far west yet, but the reports that do trickle in say that their ferocity and devastation is without equal. Albrecht went to Constantinople to speak with scholars from the east and to hear news of how exactly these Mongols fight. Most of the scholars laughed, believing the Mongols were just a myth, but some traders and soldiers with tired eyes did take the time to sit with him and explain their horror stories. Albrecht took in every word and left Constantinople some months later with a much greater understanding of war. He spent most of the following years at peace, mostly focusing on training his men, upgrading his castles, and chatting with his mother, who he promised he would soon give a throne of her own. He followed through on that promise in December of 1247, declaring war on the Queen of Poland to put his wise mother Małgorzata on the throne. Finally, after all this time, Poland will be integrated into the realm. The war was won with ease, as Poland had fallen from their zenith long ago, and once Albrecht's mother passes away, he will inherit her kingdom and rule it all for himself. He intends to treat the Poles well, as they've been, throughout their shared history, good allies and worthy foes. The Poles are a sort of brother culture to the Prussians, at least in this timeline. Not to mention, Polish cavalry could prove useful against the Mongols, which Albrecht had learned back in Constantinople. In February of 1259, Albrecht formally integrated his many kingdoms into one larger empire of Prussia. The previous kingdom of Prussia, Pomerania, Denmark would now be just Prussia under its one Kaiser Albrecht. He took the eagle from Poland as the symbol for his empire, and told his men that this realm would be good enough for him, but that the wars are not over. The Mongols are fast approaching, and when they do, the rest of the Europeans won't take them seriously. With a rather grim look on his face, Albrecht told his soldiers that even Constantinople will likely fall eventually. It will be up to the Prussians to keep the rest of Europe safe, whether they like it or not. And so the men trained and trained. They fought in war games with each other, practicing both German and Mongol tactics, using both men and women, and happily relieving from duty those soldiers who were too weak to deserve a place in the army. Though he'd realistically inherited most of his conquests, Kaiser Albrecht became known as the Conqueror in July that year. His men started calling him that in reference to his conquest of the Mongols, which had yet to come to fruition, but which the men believed was a certainty. With little time remaining, Albrecht took a trip to Spain, where he studied even further diverse tactics to better prepare for the Mongols. He learned from the Arabs and the Spaniards yet more cavalry tactics, and emerged from that land an exalted warrior. Upon returning home, he established the Königsberg Military Academy, where he crafted a curriculum to be taught to every officer in the army. The military academy here will continue to provide Prussia with a great military acumen even beyond the von Hoya dynasty. After ensuring the classrooms were bustling with young officers, Albrecht took leave to attend a coronation off in Rome. The Pope demanded that any man calling himself Kaiser pay him homage, and so Albrecht did go and allow the Pope to crown him. He told the Pope that he'd protect Christendom with all he could muster, and he did mean it. The Pope simply asked him, "From whom are you protecting us, my son?" He did not understand the wrath of the coming Mongols. It was there that he gave a famous speech that you might remember from the beginning of the video. He talked about Prussia and the danger of ignorance. The Catholic world right now is sitting in ignorance of the Mongols and of what they can do. They've taken their faith to be the only shield they need, but God gave the people their minds so they could create the real shields that will keep them safe. He went on to speak of his own family, who often quarreled over the likes of just one kingdom or just one title, or even at times just one annoying series of quips. Donar von Hoya, the founder of this dynasty, he came from nothing. His humility was the spirit motivating Albrecht to understand the Mongol menace. Humility and a base origin, it's what really gives Albrecht the understanding that he is ultimately just one man. All he can do is focus on the things over which he has control, and that's Prussia. So the speech ended, and the crowd went on his head with a confused audience. Was this first Kaiser of Prussia already a lunatic? Again, they focused on the wrong things. That's all fine. Prussia alone can hold off the Mongols should Albrecht achieve what he needs to. Here's a quick check on the culture map, by the way, since it's been a while. Prussians have mostly settled in and around the heartland of the kingdom, alongside Kurland and Jutland as little enclaves. The Danish culture has practically been wiped out by the Dano-Pomeranians, which are German-speaking, but they still raise runestones at least, implying that they are in fact German-speaking, but they write in Futhark or something. Definitely an interesting idea, a German runestone. The Nordmarker and Pomeranian cultures take up most of the rural and western sections of the kingdom, and the Lithuanians have remained mostly untouched, if only because the Prussian settlers there have shown little interest in the dense forests. That works for the Lithuanians, and it works for the Prussians, so the status quo remained. At least it would remain for a few years. Over the, at this point, nearly century and a half of Prusso-Lithuanian life together, there was a slow but steady exchange of people. Some Prussians would escape into Lithuania to live wild or perhaps to escape city life, while some Lithuanians looking for work would move, in small numbers, into the growing cities of Königsberg, Danzig, or even Berlin sometimes. Because the two cultures came to understand each other so well, they eventually sort of merged into another new German identity, the Kurlanders. This was a sort of unexpected cultural development in the eyes of both cultures who'd long seen each other as quite separate, but as more and more mixing between populations continued, it was getting harder and harder to even tell the two people apart just by looking. The Kurlander culture is still Low German speaking, but carries a more Baltic sort of lifestyle. On the outside, these Germanophones seem like relatively normal Germans, but their adaptation to forest life, skill with the bow, and general militarization marks them as quite different. Albrecht himself wasn't particularly enthusiastic about this new culture, but he saw the talent of the Lithuanian forest wardens, and for that, happily welcomed them into his barracks. Though in-game he's now a Kurlander, he's still very much so a Prussian at heart, but one who admires the martial abilities of the Lithuanians. You know, it would be cool to see hybrids that only affected land, instead of always also affecting the lords that rule it one day. Sort of like back in CK2, how Norman lords ruling Anglo-Saxon territory would slowly change that land to English culture, but still themselves be Norman. Obviously, Crusader Kings 2 didn't have nearly as good culture mechanics as CK3, but just saying, in that one particular aspect, they did a great job. That aside, let's get to the main event here. The Mongols are going very hard off in Asia, having taken all of China, Japan, Persia, and the steppes as of December of 1276. The only realm holding the Mongols back from Prussia is Ruthenia, but the impatient Albrecht decided he was tired of waiting and pressed a claim to Ruthenia he'd inherited from his mother. Don't forget, she was more than a princess of Poland. She was the princess of all West Slavia, including the kingdom of Ruthenia. Albrecht had no issue adding that kingdom to his collection of titles in the summer of 1278, and now he's on the border with the Mongols. The question is, will they strike, or should he surprise them? Well, Albrecht first took what remained of West Slavia, which the Carpathian Empire had taken, and then he did indeed make a first strike against the Mongols. The war is for a small tract of land by the Carpathian Mountains, and it's not really even about land or money or anything, just about proving the Prussians are better at war than the Mongols. On account of a lack of castles or forts in Mongolia's westernmost territories, Kaiser Albrecht reached into the edges of the steppe quite quickly. The armies met at the field of Taganrog, and I will say, in the Mongols' defense, they chose for some reason to make this a naval landing, giving Albrecht a huge bonus. The Prussians won, rather anticlimactically, and the war was over. Going over the reported casualties, the Mongols lost decisively, and Kaiser Albrecht marched his men back home in an almost Roman-style triumph. In the years to come, the Prussians will hold the line against the Mongols, though Albrecht himself would only fight them this time, and maybe another time or two. He's already in his late 60s, and in good time he'll probably pass away. He has no sons, only daughters, meaning his realm may split among them. It was while reflecting on his war against the Mongols that he remembered what he had said at his coronation about 15 years ago. The Mongols did indeed conquer Constantinople, as he once prophesied, and he did defeat them through his focus and strength of will. Ignorance could have been the end of Prussia, and even more, of Europe. Wisdom prevailed again. Still, the rulers of Christendom will squabble over nothing, and one day, when Albrecht dies, maybe his own daughters will fight each other. Time will tell. With that, the story of Prussia comes to an end, at least for now. A martial culture which was able to step to the greatest warriors of this period was born out of the faithful ambitions of a theologian and tempered by the ruthless rulership of several murderous kings. Only through this rather unique lineage did Kaiser Albrecht come to rule at just around the right time and with the right lessons to do what he did against the Mongols. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for your time.